Hello and welcome to She the People's Women Writers Fest. As we continue to grasp horrific recent events of crimes against girls and women across India, I realize how these incidents are an extension of a story weaved through decades, the India story, which reminds us how this nation's systems have failed women in the past and continue to fail women even today. While talking about the future seems like a long shot now, we must hope and enact to change the country we want to be proud of. And change begins by addressing the wrong. Change begins by questioning the fabric of the society we live in. So, extending this conversation, I have two authors with me, a mother daughter duo, who bring to the table collective and individual experiences of what it means to be a woman today in India and how we can work to break cycles of abuse and hate. Our first panelist is Dr. Rakhshanda Jalil, a noted literary historian, a multi award winning translator, and Urdu critic. She has also published a collection of essays titled Love in the Time of Hate. She has published 30 books and written over 50 academic papers and essays. She now runs an organization called Hindustani Awaz, devoted to the popularization of Hindi, Urdu literature, and culture. Next, we have Aaliya Waziri. She's an advocate practicing at the High Court of Delhi, author of In the Body of a Woman, a collection of essays on law, gender, and society. Welcome, both of you. So, I would begin asking my first question to you, Dr. Rakshanda. This book seems like a fitting portrayal of the India we're living in today, right? And the world around us. So, can you recall the time when you decided to write it and why?
Hi, Bhavna. Good to be here. And first for me to be sharing a panel with Aaliya. Looking forward to fireworks. So to answer your question, I don't think there was a defining moment. I don't think I woke up one day and said, I'm going to write this book. This book, incidentally, has 80 essays. 80 essays divided into 4 sections: politics, people, places, passions. So a book like this naturally is written over a period of time. So I cannot say that I had a moment of epiphany when I felt that, this needs to be put together as a book. It started out life as columns, fortnightly columns actually, for the Quint called Hindustani Awaz. And the world we live in, especially in the past few years, and this book dates back to about 3 years, I would say. There's so much happening in the world around us. Every day, the newspaper headlines give us so much to think about, there's so much that troubles us, some things that confound us, some things that pain us, occasionally something that causes deep anguish. In fact, there is something where Aaliya's work and mine intersects in this book. 3 years ago, the beginning of the new year, I think 1st or 2nd of January, I woke up to find myself being auctioned virtually as a maid to work in people's homes. This awfully sounding sully by deals. And it was painful. It was kind of disgusting also in some ways, the kind of misogyny that this has. So while I sort of stayed quiet and worked it out in my head, it was a nice sunny day, and I remember Aaliya sitting across from me, and she worked it out differently. She chose to write about it. She chose to write about how not just misogyny, but what kind of mind thinks of something like this. So it's a very potent and toxic combination of toxic masculinity, of misogyny, of communalism, And I think the one thread that runs through the 80 essays in this book is this attempt to call out all of these dark forces, and by extension to kind of rejuvenate and replenish and nourish in whatever way one can. As a writer, the only tool I have are words, to write, to talk about love. And love not in a romantic or secular sense, but, love for the country, love for its Mosam, its cities, its people, everything, essentially.
Right. Aaliya, you're an author yourself, and Love at the Time of Hate, like Dr. Rakshanda said, it's about love for one's country also, right? So, how strongly do you feel the written word can make an impact by holding up a mirror to societal wrongdoings?
Bhavna, thank you for having me here. I never thought I'd be on a panel with my mother. I don't have an answer to your question. I don't know if there is an answer to your question, because I grew up watching my mother write when we were little kids, and when my mother was writing her first very big book, which is on invisible monuments in the Delhi. We would be dragged out of bed as little children on Sunday and be forced to go to these awful, dilapidated monuments, which, she wrote about and ended up becoming this big book. And now it's one of the biggest bestsellers. And then she wrote about this and that, and we were living in this not very nice neighborhood, which was a ghetto, and Domino's refused to deliver there. And she wrote a column in Express, I think. And a couple of weeks later, a couple of weeks later or a couple of months later, they did deliver pizza. So I don't know if it makes a difference. Right now, it seems like a shout into the void. Right now, it seems like when I do an interview like this, there are a lot of hate-filled comments and people threatening me. That's what happens. I don't know if it looks differently when you've published 30 books and when you're at a couple of decades later. I hope so. I don't have an answer to that right now.
Right. Okay, we're talking about the irony, the ironical times that we're living in, because on one hand, we have these slogans called Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, right? But our girls are deprived of a very basic necessity, which is safety in our homes, at our workplaces, in the public, and in a country where 500 million population of women, they're struggling to find an equal place in society, and they're living in fear. So, Alia, I'll come to you first. Do you think it's because gender related issues are considered unworthy of time and resources, and that is why we are failing our women today?
Of course. I think the recent Calcutta incident, if you see most of the discourse around it on social media, the one thing that everybody is talking about is that up until now, we've been talking about protecting women. All our laws are about protecting women. But we don't want, I mean, of course, we want protection, but the debate isn't about protection, it's safety. It is safety and versus protection. And the question is, you're using the existing apparatus to fit a, a to fit women into the equation and saying, okay, this is the society we live in, let's mold women in a manner where they will feel more protected. But that's not how it works. You can't have ministers telling us that if we wore less Western clothes, or if we didn't eat chow mein, if we didn't go out at night, or if we didn't watch movies, we wouldn't
Remember
get
ripped jeans? There was a
ripped
minister
jeans.
chief
Yeah,
minister who talked about ripped jeans. Yeah.
ripped
Yeah.
jeans and chow mein. Yes, and when Nirbhaya happened, there was a sitting. Then all of these are sitting ministers and cabinet ministers and member of parliaments who are saying, don't eat chow mein, don't wear these jeans, don't go out to watch movies, as if that is going to fix the situation. So you're using the existing apparatus and fixing and placing protection of women in that situation and saying, okay, this is the solution we have to this problem, take it or leave it. But that's not how it works. That's not going to solve the situation. You don't fix a broken bone by placing a band-aid over it. That's not how the
Right.
bone is going to heal.
Right. Uh, Dr. Rakshanda, I'll come to you about uh, gender and violence that you've also mentioned in the book. You mentioned in the essay the abduction and gang rape, the murder of an 8-year-old girl, right, by 6 men and a juvenile in 2018 when it took place in Jammu and Kashmir. We've seen what happened in Manipur, and we hear and read cases about Dalit girls and young minors being raped across the country too. The link between communal violence and violence against women in such cases is often ignored. We choose to ignore it. Time and again, women and their bodies are put at the forefront to showcase power. So, as a historian, you know that this is not a new phenomena. It has happened in the past. Why do you think bodies of women and girls become sites for violence?
Well, first of all, Bhavna, I'm actually a literary historian, not a historian. I look at that intersection of literature and history. So, and I find so much in the past where history and literature have come together and the lessons they hold, partition being one such thing. And we saw in the partition how women's bodies became contested sites of violence. This whole business of honor, izzat, izzat ka badla lena. So this concept of badla is also wreaked on the bodies of women. Now, women in any case are more prone to violence than sexual violence than men. I mean, statistically. Well, I'm not saying that sexual violence doesn't happen against boys and men. Of course it does, but I'm saying that it happens more so with women.
Aaliya, I remember speaking with you after your book released, and we spoke about the urgency to have a judicial gender sensitization system for survivors of crime, also, right? And I remember you mentioning the word Nirbhaya that time, and you said that how ironical it is that, Nirbhaya means living without fear, but every woman and girl in this country lives in fear. So, are we informed enough about having a holistic understanding of the different facets of everyday sexism faced by Indian women that actually form the pyramid of these gruesome crimes?
Are we as in the society, as in you and me,
Yeah,
women, or as in the
the
different strata
collective.
of
Yeah,
society, rural, urban, or men at large?
yeah, the society at large, actually.
I think I just wrote for you recently. I wrote for She the
Yeah,
People on
yeah,
Calcutta. And I remember there's this line that you and I talked about a lot where I said that most of what we were talking about in Calcutta on social media ended up being an echo chamber.
yeah,
Everything you were saying, I was saying, our friends were saying, that was being shared was for women, being written by women and intended to be read by women.
yeah.
So we know what we go through. We know the different facets of sexism, harassment, violence that we face, even benign patriarchy in all its forms. Are people aware of it? Maybe to some level, but do people care about it? Is it important?
Yeah.
Is it how, where is it on the list of priority? That is a better question of that we should ask.
Dr. Rakshanda, coming back to you, we were talking about how a certain minister made a comment about a woman wearing ripped jeans, right? And it was said that she's not a good role model, not for her own children and or for society. So this also serves as a reminder of the excessive importance given to clothes without actually addressing the real issues at hand. Victim shaming and victim blaming, like we are talking about, they've taken precedence when incidents of rape and molestation occur. So, are we as a country, why are we not able to come out of it? Do you think there is a different approach we should take to break this cycle? Because this is a conversation that happens over and over again.
Yeah. Maybe this example is not my place to cite it. Maybe Aaliya might be a better person, but it springs instantly to mind when you talk about this. Aaliya, do I have your permission to give this example of the Kajal incident that happened to you?
I have already, I was in an interview with Lalan Top and I said this and I got into a
Okay,
lot of
just
trouble
for
with it. I
Okay,
don't,
I shall not take any names, but Alia went to give the invite for her book to somebody, and that person barely looked at the invite, barely showed any interest in the book that she had also gone to give him. He just looked at Alia
Yeah,
and said, Kajal, thoda zyada nahi ho gaya? So this is the way and it was not meant in a bad way, but it was the first reaction from
yeah,
the person. Now I'm
and this
saying
person
that
is,
good people,
sorry, this person is very big in my
very
field,
important person.
very
Yeah.
important in the field that I am in.
Yeah. So not an illiterate person, not an uneducated person. The point I'm trying to make is good people, well-meaning men, not people, men, sometimes
yeah,
don't, and this is where benign patriarchy actually comes in, that
yeah,
it just sees you as a woman. in this instance, that person refused to see Aaliya as a lawyer, as an author, as a first-time published author of a book. Only just saw her as a woman, and the first thing he noticed was that she had put kajal. Now, again, this is not an offensive remark. It's not an offensive remark in the category of the chief minister who talked about ripped jeans and how a woman who, because that lady was accompanied by her child in the flight and was seated next to the chief minister when this incident happened. So it's nowhere close to being offensive. But nevertheless, my objection is when men just see women as women and not, not the rest of their persona. Now, this book that we are actually talking about here, this Love in the Time of Hate, actually looks at the world around me in the mirror of Urdu. So everywhere to further my argument, I actually pluck into this huge ocean that is Urdu poetry and come up with some pearls. And those pearls always help me further my argument. So in this instance, the essay that you are referring to, there have been men who have talked about, for instance, Majaz, who says, "Tere mathe pe aanchal bahut hi khoob hai, lekin tu is aanchal se parcham bana leti to acha tha." This veil on your forehead is very pretty, but if you were to have fashioned a pennant, a pennant is the flag that you carry into battle. So a kind of, that kind of standard or pennant, not a regular flag, but had you fashioned a pennant out of this, it would have been better. So there is that. But the great bulk of Urdu poetry kind of, what shall I say? It just objectifies women. Let me, if you permit, read out a few instances. Abru aanchal mein dupatte ke chupana hai baja. It is perfectly all right to keep your honor hidden in the hem of your dupatta. Tur kya mayan mein rakhte hain talwaron ko? After all, don't Turkish soldiers sheath their swords and scabbards? Now, which world are we living in here? We are citing and we are constantly invoking the imagery of a battlefield, of soldiers, of swords, of scabbards. Why? Elsewhere, दुपट्टे को आगे से दोहरा न ओढ़ो, नमूदार चीजें छुपाने से हासिल. Don't wear your dupatta folded in the front. Things that should remain hidden become visible. Now, this is just a sampler. There's so many instances, some that I cite and some that are very well known to Urdu readers, that this obsession with angiya, with choli and with dupatta and with, bhigi choli and chust choli, we have all lived through it. Our films have perpetuated it, where the poet stopped, the film lyricist picked it up, So whether it was holy or it was anything. And with that, the related issue of Eve teasing, which is such a typically South Asian expression everywhere, but we don't call it Eve teasing anywhere else outside of South Asia. And how we have legitimized it and, made it so normal that the hero is Eve teasing, is chasing, he's stalking the woman, but she's a trophy that will fall into his lap. So the message that is going out is that it's perfectly all right to do it because that's the way, and women need some, some amount of following, and then she is this ripe fruit that is going to fall into your lap. So I think somewhere by using popular tropes, be it in poetry, be it in cinema, be it in popular culture, but more specifically poetry in this book, I further my arguments, whether they are on gender, whether they are on communalism or a whole range of subjects. I further the argument that, we have normalized so many things. Stalking being one of them, women's clothing being another. And this gentleman who remarked on Aaliya's kajal, where does he get his legitimacy? He gets his legitimacy from a popular culture where it's all right. Isme kya harj hai? Main to taarif hi kar raha hu. So this legitimacy is what we need to question. Who made it all right? We didn't. As women, we object.
You're both mother and daughter. And Aaliya, I remember you had told me in an interview earlier that when you were a little girl, you were labeled as one of those feminist types, you had said, right? And you said as a girl of 12, you were half convinced that being a feminist was a pretty bad thing, given the tone the word was used in. but you came to realize that looking at things from the lens of a woman was frowned upon. It was only in law school, I mean, I quote you, you said it was only in law school that I finally began attributing the right words to my so-called feminist feelings. It dawned on me that asking for safety, inclusion, and parity is no sin as long as you ascribe the socially acceptable words for it. So, growing up in a family that did not limit you to your gender, and then coming out in the world and navigating the sexism that we're talking about, that is very deeply ingrained, which people say is not offensive, but they find it very normal. How did you navigate this?
बहुत मुश्किल है. It's horrible. Um, what I was saying is that I was half convinced. Now I'm 100% convinced. It's a terrible thing. There's somebody who I admire very much. He's a senior advocate, and he took me aside. He's very, very well-wisher of mine, and he took me aside and said that, listen, you have to stop this. You can't pigeonhole yourself as a feminist. Your practice is going to stop before it begins. So if you want your work to continue, you better put aside this feminist nonsense and you better start doing other kind of work. So the world we live in, or at least the profession I am in, the more I continue to do this kind of work, there is a very good possibility, and I'm reminded of it almost every day by people who I'm telling you are my well-wishers. They don't hate me, they don't have any malice towards me. They keep telling me, sweetheart, this is not going to work out in your favor. You better stop this women's rights nonsense. You will not earn any money, and you will be one of those Narivadi, if that's the right word.
Jholawala also.
Jholawala is like too left wing, but this is like very morcha and all. And these are educated people, and I really like these people because they're not bad people, they're not uneducated, they're good people, and I like them. So it's hard because I wasn't raised in some rural area by people who were nomads. I was raised by two educated people. My mother is more famous and more educated, accomplished than my father, and that's just the. I also feel that sometimes what you see at home is normalized, and when you go out in the world and you're like, yeah, this is not how the world works,
Yeah.
that is more problematic, and you spend a very long time trying to come to terms with the fact that that is not how the world works, and then you end up writing books about it, but again nothing changes. And then I answer your question, if the pen is ever going to change, if the pen is going to mirror the society. So yeah, it's very hard, but does it make a difference? Do I stop doing it? No, I'm still doing this interview with you, so no, I don't know.
Dr. Rakshanda, for you, like dealing with gender bias and all of these things back in your time as a young woman, and then having a daughter who's also navigating the same things today, right? So, was there a sort of an unlearning for you with respect to dealing with sexism and the patriarchal society? Is it something like, a society that's trying to mute women's voices out, especially strong women's voices out? So with these discussions with Aaliya back at home, has your perspective changed in how we should deal with such a thing?
Oh, yes, enormously. By the way, I have two daughters. Alia is the elder one. The younger is more ardent than Alia, if it's possible, as a feminist. And growing up, I considered myself a feminist. But when I see both Alia and her sister, I realize that feminism is a work in progress. It changes over the years, and it's a generational thing. Something that happened in my mother's time, who was born to very liberal parents. She, in turn, gave us a very liberal upbringing. But it seems very, very medieval and belonging to the dark ages, some of the things. We don't have the time to go into details. Let's just take one word, allowed, or we let you do it. There's no question of me using this word with my daughters. There is no question. And not just now when they are in their late 20s, but even when they were younger. My husband and I, as parents, understood very early on that this business of uh, um, we are letting you do it, is not the right way to go about it. And this business of allowing, the other instance I can think of was that despite the liberalism of my parents, there were certain unwritten rules that we followed, which were you need to be back home before sunset. Now, I think technology has come to our aid as parents. Even when both girls were very young, cell phones had come in. And by the time they were in college, they certainly had cell phones. So I'm not saying I was tracking them relentlessly, but at least I had an idea of their physical safety. And as we talked about early on, physical safety remains a concern. I mean, no matter what you say, the physical safety of girls and women is a lifelong concern.
How to keep hope alive when the world around us is falling apart. So, Dr. Rakshanda, one of my favorite parts in the book is from the essay, like where you quote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and where you've written that vast amounts of poetry have been written on the four pillars, namely azadi, freedom, barabari, equality, wakar, dignity, and hukuk, rights. By extension, copious amounts of poetry have also been written on all that violates these or attempts to diminish, dent, or demolish these four pillars, namely zulm, oppression, jabr, compulsion, coercion, or force, sitam, outrage, or injustice. The recent incidents in our country, they tell us of a time that snatches these four pillars of freedom, equality, dignity, and rights from women. We constantly ask those who hold more experiences, has anything changed in the past decades? But I ask you, like, are we intentionally not changing as a country? Or is our moral awakening very short spanned?
I don't think we are intentionally not changing. I think we are in a rush to do many things to modernize ourselves as a nation, as a society, as a people. There's more consumerism. There is, keeping up with the Joneses has taken on enormous proportions. So, for a whole variety of reasons, I think there is a certain heedlessness. I'm not saying that incidents like the Kolkata rape case or what happened in Delhi goes unnoticed and unheeded. I don't think we have reached those heights where it makes no difference to us. Surely you remember the protests that took place in Delhi when Nirbhaya happened. We've seen calls by various, not women's groups only, but civil society groups of seizing the night and owning the streets and, that kind of thing. It's happened recently in Calcutta. And the one thing that comes to our aid each time, I think, is poetry in various languages. Because I work in Urdu poetry, I like to, quote from that. But we saw it all through. We saw it during the anti-CAA protests. We saw it every time a big incident happens and there is a street march or there's a candlelight vigil. What comes to people's aid most naturally? I think that's poetry. And I think that is also the impulse that runs behind a book like this. Now, if you permit, Bhavna, let me read out some things from the chapter that you are alluding to, which is about the
Yes, please go ahead.
UN International Human Rights Day and the four pillars. Now,
Yeah.
incidentally, there's a beautiful poster that was gifted to me by this activist, the late Kamla Bhasin. She gave me this poster with the Human Rights Declaration written in Urdu, Hindi, and in English. One hangs at the door of Aaliya's room, and one hangs elsewhere in the house. And the one in Urdu near Aaliya's room says, "तमाम इंसान जन्म से बराबर और आज़ाद हैं, सबके यकसा वक़ार हैं, सबके यकसा हुकूक हैं." So it talks about the equality of human rights. But what I really want to sort of read out very briefly are some of these poems that I've used in this essay to make my point. And what I was saying earlier, that why is poetry helpful? Because in a few words, it's able to articulate concerns that many people have. And you and I and others who are not poets don't have the ability and the means to say certain things which the poet has already said for us. So why not use them? Why not use them as resources? to aid our larger fight. Now, look at this by Faiz Ahmed Faiz. Bol zubaं ab tak teri hai, bol ke lab azad hai tere, bol ab tak sutwa jism hai tera, bol ke jaan ab tak teri hai. Now, whether it is factory workers in the Hero Honda city in Gurgaon, whether it is teachers protesting at Delhi University against some vice chancellor or the other, whether it is students, whether it is activists, whether it is somebody talking about against anybody in authority, something like this comes to our aid. And we've seen it time and time again, even in states where Urdu or Hindi is not very well known or very well understood. But such is the simplicity of certain words that they immediately catch you. So every now and then during anti-CAA for protests, we saw bol this being recited. Bol zaban ab tak teri hai. Now let me read some more. जब तलक दहर में कातिल का निशान बाकी है, till even a trace of the murderer remains in the world, तुम मिटाते ही चले जाओ निशान कातिल के. Keep removing every trace of the murderer. So this is something that there are many, many ways the poet is saying essentially the same thing, that protest, speaking up, that is the only way. Now, to answer your question, and to as it were address my own dilemma, will the blind see and will the deaf hear? I think our job is to just keep speaking, just speaking up, keep calling out the elephant in the room, and and then use whatever we have at our disposal. Now here's Sahib. हम अमन चाहते हैं मगर जुल्म के खिलाफ, गर जंग लाजमी है तो फिर जंग ही सही. जालिम को जो ना रोके वो शामिल है जुल्म में, कातिल को जो ना टोके वो कातिल के साथ है. We want peace, we are against violence, but if war is inevitable, then so be it. He who doesn't stop the tyrant is part of the tyranny. He who doesn't check the murderer is with the murderer. Now, murderer and murder can be replaced with any form of oppression, with anybody who is in a dominant position and is being is misusing that power against the weak. Let me end with one last one. कलील आप नहीं और हम कसीर नहीं, हुकूक सबके हैं यकसां, कोई हकीर नहीं. You are not few and we are not many. Everyone's rights are equals. No one is lowly. Now here, I think there are many things in this dialogue that we are having today. There is, of course, gender, but there are also minority rights. There are also rights of the disenfranchised. There are the rights of those who've been pushed to the margins. They can be women, they can be forest dwellers, they can be Adivasis, they can be Dalits, they can be Muslims, Christians, various forms of minorities, LGBTQ. You add whatever you want to this mix. But essentially, anybody who feels that they've been pushed to the margins, I think they can draw solace sometimes from voices that talk of their rights.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this meaningful conversation. I think there's a lot to take away from this and a lot to take away from both of you as a team also. So thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhavna.